Welcome to the Baby Playbook Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me and in what is a bit of a series that we are running with at the moment, really delving into care options for your baby, daycare to different styles of care, to how to get your baby used to daycare, introducing it, how to choose one, just getting through this stage of what many parents get to, which is you have your baby and you have this precious time with your baby, which hopefully is, a really beautiful time that you get. But then starting to think about whether you're returning to work or whether you in your lifestyle need, a little bit of extra help and care on the side. It's something that we all, most of us, or at least, have to start to think about pretty early, actually, with all things such as wait lists and this and that. So it's nice, I think, to have a bit of guidance in this area, and also touching on the safety element of daycare and really being trustworthy and finding something that suits your family and really suits your values and your way of life. So today's episode is going to be a really interesting one. We're going to be looking at kind of some left of field options when it comes to care for your baby, because at least in Australia, if you're listening in Australia, we've had a bit of a traditional system kind of the last few decades where, of course, when you think of daycare, you kind of think of the traditional centre, long opening hours, and, getting your baby into one is sometimes a bit of a struggle depending on where you live. And then on the other hand, you might be relying on your family for help. You might be also looking at things like family daycare options or even perhaps like a nanny. So there are a few options there, but there isn't really something that suits parents who are looking for something a little bit more flexible. Maybe it's not a full day that you're after. Maybe it's an option where you're not necessarily away from your child, but you are able to work with them alongside you. So I was really excited when I got contacted by Lauren and her team. Lauren Perrett is the creator of BubbaDesk, and she's a mum and she's the founder of the business, and it is a co-working space with on-site childcare created in response to, of course, the lack of flexible childcare options for working parents. It's such an interesting concept, and it stemmed from the fact that she herself was going back to work and didn't really want to look at that traditional long daycare option. She was looking at different options. So I love that she's sharing this with us this week. Thank you so much for joining me, Lauren.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Amazing. Well, let's get straight into it. What I want to kind of first kick off and give everybody an idea of, because we have some listeners who might not have even thought about this yet. Maybe they're just pregnant, but sometimes with these crazy wait lists, you have to kind of think about it even at that point. So what are the current options that parents are really looking for when it comes to external care for their little ones?
Yeah, well, look, first of all, from my own experience, I wasn't even thinking about care options when I was pregnant, right? It's something that you probably think about then when you're nearing that return to work. And what you're thinking about during pregnancy can be very different to the reality of what you want and expect of a care option when you actually have your baby. I know that's how I felt. I was very bullish going into having my baby, and I thought I would return to work at 4 months, put him in a daycare, and off I go back to performing exactly the same level as I used to pre having a baby, which for my reality just wasn't the case. I felt very, very deeply, viscerally different when I had him and I had him in my arms. So the choices that are out there, like you mentioned, have been around for a long time. I think it's almost a century that traditional daycare has been around for. And yes, it's kind of iterated. Yes, it's more highly regulated. And yes, it's more got to focus on education. But the format hasn't really changed. It's a drop and not see your baby all day kind of style of care. And then obviously there's a nanny, which is quite inaccessible to many families, no subsidy, not tax deductible unless you put it through a little business scenario. An au pair, which can be quite transient unless you find someone who wants to stick around for a long time. You also have to have the house set up to be able to accommodate an au pair typically. And then obviously there's the reliance on family. But given the current economic climate, are parents, grandparents actually available to spend that time and help you out? Maybe not. Maybe they are if you're in a really good position. So yeah, I found that there wasn't really a care option that suited my specific needs. And I think that care options in general tend to try and fit one size fits all in terms of, here's the care option that's funded, you must all use this. But of course, that doesn't suit every family, it doesn't suit every child, it doesn't suit every style of parenting or how you might be feeling in that moment when returning to work. So that really was where, like you mentioned, how BubbaDesk came about.
Yeah, and it's interesting to know as well, I think, because of course we're coming to this bit of a wave, and you guys are part of that in changing things and looking at different options. And I think a big part of that, you would agree as well, Lauren, is that most families now need two working parents, right? So take it back however long ago it was, perhaps we did have that. I don't want to call it a luxury, but it probably felt like a bit of a luxury where one parent could stay home for whether it is a little bit longer and get that baby to 3 years old and then just start preschool. But now it does feel like in this economic climate and in the cost of living crisis that we're in is that we need options. But it feels like the options that are out there aren't I guess the best fit for many families. So talk me through how BubbaDesk works and I guess why you think it's such an important option for this changing climate and dynamic that we're finding ourselves in at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, there's been pressure on on both parts of the family dynamic to be working and helping to support the family. But, unfortunately, sometimes it's at the expense of time with our
Mm,
children, and time is being taken away from us with those early days, the 0 to 1,000 days, which we know are so important for secure attachment, and for the development of our child. They are taken away from us, unfortunately, if we are returning to work and having that pressure on both parents supporting us. So, BubbaDesk provides an option. I think parents need more options when it comes to care. I don't think it's a one size fits all. And what BubbaDesk really provides is true close proximity and true flexibility, which is what the modern parent needs and wants. We hear from thousands of parents regularly. When we first started, I used to have this registration of interest form, and I would collect data on, tell me why would BubbaDesk support your family? And 9 times out of 10, it was just comments around, it just doesn't feel right to be away from my baby at such a young age. So I think parents need options that are more supportive for that initial return to work, and enables that ease of transition of out of home care, and isn't just straight away having distance from your baby, which then obviously has a counter effect to positive feeding experiences, secure attachment, um, a more, a clear mind when you're actually trying to work and returning to work, and not having that stress and anxiety kind of clogging up your brain space when you're trying to work because you're worried about what might be going on with your baby, just because of that instinct and having the distance away.
yeah, certainly so. And it's interesting. I don't know if you have found this as well, Lauren, but I felt like when I was researching into this area, I went back to work at about like the 8, 9 month mark with both my kids. Um, I just felt like there was nowhere to actually even gather the options. Like, what were the options? Like, all I did was talk to people and get different. Like, oh yeah, my kids go to a long day care center, and my sister would tell me about. Oh, okay, so I didn't go to any daycare, but then when my children turned 3, I got into a preschool. Do you feel like there's also this lack of like information in this space, and just like here are the actual options, and let's get it out there to parents so that they know what they could consider.
Yeah, definitely. I think that each kind of category, I guess, stays in their lane in terms of what they offer. And then there's obviously, thousands of different individual providers that provide a service, whether it's access to nanny, like a nanny agency, or a family daycare, or everything in between. So, yeah, there's probably not really been, I guess, a marketplace that is
Mm.
uh, based on actual reviews of actual parents, so that it's genuine reviews. It's hard. Like, you have to go so much by your gut, and like you said, with talking to your mother's group, probably about what worked for them, and learn from things that suited their experience. But I think it all really comes down to, it's such an individual experience, and so you need to match that care option to your individual wants and needs, and how your baby's feeling and how you're feeling, and go with that. I know that some people aren't in a position to even have the option, and so they're forced down this kind of one size fits all model. And just, we're trying to exist to provide an alternative, we're definitely not anti-daycare. Like, we see a need and we support daycare. Me personally, I waited until my child was 3, and that's because I wanted him to be able to articulate his day. I wanted him to be able to use the bathroom himself, and I wanted him and I just to feel ready. I also understand that he, at that point, was ready for forming friendships, whereas before that, it wasn't as important, right? So that's my personal choice. I know it's a personal choice for lots of other parents as well. It can be a personal choice, but then they don't have the means to be able to use alternative services because of the expense. So what we're trying to push for is options like BubbaDesk, options that provide close proximity, should also be funded by the government, and we should be considered as part of the viable childcare option and be included in, subsidies, whether that's the current subsidy or a future style of subsidy. But we should be considered as a pivotal part of helping the economy, helping parents return to work, especially mothers.
Yeah, certainly. So let's talk a little bit more about the finance side, because that is something as well that many parents have to get their head around and we're talking specifically here in Australia as well, is of course that the government does provide families with a subsidy to get some money back from their daily fee when it comes to particular forms of childcare. And that's, of course, based on your income. It is tested, and it's, a very confusing mathematical process. Sometimes you're quite surprised by the percentage number that comes back for you. But let's talk a bit about that, because, of course, what you guys are pushing for, which is completely understandable, is for that government subsidy to be applicable to something like your flexible option, like BubbaDesk. Why is it so important that we start to kind of change this regulation and really start to think about, well, if this is a really highly demanded service, then it should be under the same umbrella?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it should be looked at as childcare in general, and childcare can include traditional daycare, family daycare, nanny, au pair, grandparents. Co-working with on-site childcare is a means to productivity. It's a means for people to work, so it should be supported from the government from that perspective. So currently the subsidies are only applicable to the one-size-fits-all model, traditional daycare, and that doesn't work for all families. Like, whether it's personal choice, I don't want to use daycare yet because it doesn't suit my family needs, whether I want to continue breastfeeding and the logistics of managing that with the traditional daycare just doesn't suit my needs. Proximity, I just don't want to be away from my baby for they're going through separation, or I'm just not ready because it's my maternal instinct to stay close. The location of the daycare might just not be feasible within my day to actually make it work. Medical reasons, I hear, like I said, I hear from thousands of families, and some of their reasons are really profound. Like, they took 5 years to get to their rainbow baby. They took, it was IVF, and then all of a sudden they've got it for 6 months, and then they have to be away from it for 8 hours a day because they've got to return to work, and traditional daycare is the only option. So, I think there's so many different reasons as to why the childcare model needs to be reviewed as to what is considered eligible for a subsidy. Our stance, like BubbaDesk's stance and my stance, is that it should be funded in some way. Now, I know that there's a reason, arguments that the actual subsidy, the current childcare subsidy, needs to be reviewed. It's over complex. It doesn't support everyone in the way that it should. It doesn't support all models. So, is there an argument for actually childcare should be tax deductible in some way, and also supported and funded for the lower tax bracket in another way? Like, I'm not an expert in what the funding should be, but I am an expert in what I hear from parents daily on what is needed to suit their family's needs, and that's close proximity and it's flexibility.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing, it's the parents that are kind of communicating this, right? So this is what we should be really listening to. The other thing I wanted to say as well is, like, I think one of the great things that I see about BubbaDesk as well is, and sometimes what you don't realize about traditional daycare is things like minimum amount of days. So even if you consider, okay, well, maybe I could make 1 day work, and then, you're shot back that email that says, well, it's actually a 2-day minimum. It's like you need to like overcommit to the service. And it's also things like the ability to have a half day. I think in this world where we're very encouraging of mums to, and I'm like big on this, to speak to their employer about flexibility. So like, it might not be, you look at that return to work and you think, okay, well, I can't manage 5 days. What can I manage? And you start to have those conversations with your employer. We had a great chat about this recently on the podcast. I think, we're so encouraging of that, but then when it comes to actually making that flexibility happen and that work from home, whatever it may look like, there's not too many options in terms of childcare to actually support that.
Yeah, look, I totally understand that traditional daycare requires a certain amount of days and that they don't provide much flexibility. Like, it's a complex business to run, right? Because there's huge overheads with rent and with staff, and you have to plan those staff to ensure you're within ratios. So I get that it needs to be fairly rigid. Running a similar business myself, but there's ways to be creative about it, right? So underutilized space within a property makes sense to utilize for care of children if you can have parents close by. Therefore, costs come down and you have small numbers, and so you can operate it a little bit more effectively, and so therefore you can offer flexibility to parents. Like, you're right, with BubbaDesk we offer full flexibility even on a subscription. If you book 2 days a week, you can change those days week to week to suit your working schedule. We understand things change. You might need to pop into the city. We also allow partners to share the membership as well. So you can alternate, or today I'm looking at a couple that are here together, which is really nice for the whole family to be here. So yeah, look, it can be done. Like, offering the flexibility can be done, but it is complex, and some operators can't physically do that because of all the overheads that they might have, which I understand. But yeah, to your point around employers offering flexibility, look, sometimes for an employee that can be a very sticky, tricky conversation. I had it myself, right, when I returned to work with my second baby. They knew I was doing BubbaDesk, obviously, but I had intended to return. And so when we started the discussions, I said, look, I'm going to work from home 100% of the time at BubbaDesk, and I'm only going to return 3 or 4 days a week because that's all I can manage whilst also doing all the other, mum life that I have going on. I said I'll still perform in the exact same way. You can still give me the same targets. And originally they said no. They're point blank. They were like, no, you have to be in the office. You're not coming back full part-time. Sales roles cannot be done part-time. So I said, all right, well, let me just refer you to the legislation that came into play in 2022 that actually supports employees to, especially with children I think it's under school age, that the employer must provide very reasonable grounds as to why they can deny you flexibility in your work life. So I then proposed to them essentially a plan. I said, look, this is how I'm going to return for the first 6 months. It's going to be work from BubbaDesk 100% of the time. I'm still breastfeeding. This is how I'm going to meet all of the KPIs that you've set. This is a reflection on how I did it during COVID to prove that I can do it while working from home. And this is the timeline in which I'm going to ease out of that part-time and slowly come back into full-time and also come into the office and things like that. So they ended up agreeing to everything that I proposed. Now, it might be that it was because I had BubbaDesk as my return to work method, and they knew that was going to be in a productive environment. It might have been because I pointed to the legislation, they knew they didn't have an argument, or it might have been a combination for everything. But the important point was that it was possible, even though they said no. So I think most employers can get to the point where they can understand. And I think if you can give them a really strong proposal as to how you'll return, how you'll remain productive, then it's a hard argument for them to deny. We're now working with the likes of Canva, who came on board last year, adopted us as employee benefits, Safety Culture, Combank, Woolworths Group, a number of others. Some are even paying for it. The full fee, they're actually subsidizing the entire fee. So I think there's a shift now, and there's an understanding that if corporates don't support this particular life stage, they're going to lose really good people. And if they can support you, they're going to retain you probably quite a long time, because we'll respect that and we'll appreciate that, and it will come back and be a positive for that time. So yeah, I think the angle is to pitch the wider benefits to the employer beyond just you as the individual. It's how are you supporting the wider network of parents? Oh, and here's a good suggestion on how you can do it. So
Yeah.
that's what we're seeing.
I really love that example that you gave, and especially, having that conversation with your employer, which I think can also be really, really daunting as you approach. It can be very, very anxiety inducing. And as you said, I think earlier in the podcast, you pictured what you would have been able to do while, I assume, pregnant. 4 months, I'll be fine. But that can shift in reality, and then that can also be really scary to kind of face that and say, oh, actually, I'm not ready for that, and this is actually what I need. But then to step that up into a conversation with your employer is very, it's not your favorite day of the week to approach. Thank you so much for the tips around that space and that conversation. Can you give a little bit to families just as we near the end of this episode? I guess if, families are starting to think about care, and what's a conversation look like when you sit down with, it might be with your family, with your partner. What are some of the questions you should be asking yourself, and what are some of the things that you should be thinking about at that earlier stage that perhaps we tend to miss or we forget about?
For care specifically, look, I think it's about preparing for all possibilities. So you don't know what your headspace will be like postpartum. I was incredibly, like I said, incredibly bullish during pregnancy. Postpartum all fell apart, and I had awful postnatal anxiety, and I wasn't going to perform in the same way. So my care options definitely shifted. I think that you have to be realistic and think about what the budget that you have, whether we like it or not. Unfortunately, at this point in time, children are expensive, but care is expensive as well. So what can I actually afford in terms of my care options? And then when? So give yourself maybe scenarios, if I return at 4 months postpartum, what could that look like? And who could it be with? And then returning a little bit later, 8 months, and then maybe a little bit later, 16 months. And just kind of give yourself a little bit of space to think about those different scenarios and how that could suit you financially, mentally, emotionally, physically, how your baby might reflect on that experience as well, because you never get that time back again. And it's so important for you as an individual and as a mother, but it's also really important for your baby, which obviously everyone knows. So having those early conversations with partner, with also your employer. So during pregnancy, being upfront, I don't know how I'm going to feel when I return, but here's a scenario that I return at 6 months, and this is my plan for 6 months. I'll let you know at 2 or 3 months postpartum if that's going to be feasible. If not, this is my return to work at 9 months and then 12 months. And then your employer is set up for success because they can understand how they need to fill the gaps. They can plan ahead, which is going to make them look good in front of their boss. So it should then help, hopefully, line up for a supportive environment. But I guess then the other point is who you want to care for your child. I think it should be an extension of you. I think it should be an extension of how you approach parenting, your values, your responsiveness, and you need to feel deep down in your gut that that is right, again, for you and your baby. So for me, I didn't feel that the distance was right for me and my baby Charles when I returned to work. I wanted close proximity. I wanted to get to know who was looking after my child, which is what you can do with BubbaDesk because they're literally right next door. I can pop in any time. You sit and you have a chat, like the drop-offs. I don't even call them drop-offs here because you're just walking out the door into another door. It's more of like a see you later or see you soon. But everyone kind of sits around, you're reading a book, you're hanging out, you're talking to the carers, you're asking about the weekend, then you're having little chit chats about, I don't think Harvey's going to sleep today that much because he didn't have a great night overnight. Oh, what happened? And then you kind of really get to know their routine for that day, and then how to maybe sort of change things a little bit to make sure everyone's going to have the best possible day based on what the last 24 hours was like, which I think is so important, rather than this sort of transient handover of, did they pick up on my point? I don't know. Did they write it down? Like, it just feels a bit I've said over and over, my son's daycare is great, right? He's 4 and he's at a great daycare. We had to transition him out of BubbaDesk when he was too old, and I luckily I got my first choice. I really trust the people. It's a great space, but I have said time and time again, he's got a he's allergic to band-aids, so please don't put band-aids on. And yesterday he came home with a band-aid. But it's little things. But the environment of BubbaDesk is that you can pick up on those little things throughout the day, and I just get that sense of more reassurance that I know exactly what's going on. And it's very open and transparent. So there's no sort of ways to hide and not be transparent with our space. And it's very sort of parent-led. It's very collaborative. Yeah, it's one of those places that once you try it, you really get it and you understand, and then you come back. We've got lots of returning parents coming back with their second child now, because we're just about to clock 3 years of having BubbaDesk. So we're seeing second-time mums come through, which is a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, really beautiful. And yeah, as you said, that customized experience seems like it would be such a dream for parents. And I guess the thing I wanted to also end on as well, and you would agree, is as well, I think as with everything, I think as a parent, I just like, trusting in what is best for your family, and that might be long daycare, and that might be a great center that you've found, and that might be really working for you. And then it might be something like BubbaDesk, or it might be something like a family daycare. I think not really like falling into that pressure or that weird, mum guilt of like, maybe I should be doing this, or maybe, or maybe somebody putting into your mind that option isn't best for your baby. It's like really just honing in and like knowing what your family values are, what aligns with your type of parenting, and then really going with that and like backing your family in that sense,
Totally. And it could be a combination of all of them, right? Yeah. It could be, I use a nanny on a Thursday, BubbaDesk the other days. Sometimes and obviously daycare for Charles. So, and I know lots of people within BubbaDesk use daycare some days and here some days, and some days they're just at home trying to juggle it all. So yeah, it just comes down to, it's not a one size fits all. Everyone has their own preferences. It's about what feels right for you, and it's about what enables you and your baby to have the best possible start.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you so much for your time today, Lauren. It's really good to discuss this out in the open, and, mums who would be listening, dads who might be listening as well, just getting an idea of what's out there and how they can kind of sit down and figure out what's best for them. If you guys would like to keep up with BubbaDesk, you can, of course, on all the socials at BubbaDesk is where you can find them. And if you want to give it a bit of research, it might be something that your family would love to look into as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.